The morning air at Fort Bragg was thick with humidity and silence. The sun had barely broken the horizon, and a pale orange hue dusted the sky. Rows of soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder on the gravel lot, boots perfectly aligned, backs ramrod. Straight, it was a scene of rigid discipline, a military ritual that repeated every morning with mechanical precision. But this morning felt different. Whispers had already spread through the barracks. Before dawn, something about a surprise. Inspection. A new commanding officer had taken over the 22nd Infantry just 2 weeks earlier. Lieutenant Colonel David Reese, a decorated war veteran known for his sharp tongue and even sharper expectations. He wasn't just another paper pusher climbing the ranks. Stories about him circulated fast. Stories of him chewing out captains in front of their units, of catching errors no one else would spot, and of demanding absolute perfection. No excuses. No exceptions. Soldiers who hadn't yet met him in person stood stiffer than usual, hearts pounding in anticipation. Among them was Private First Class Layla Torres, positioned in the second row. Her uniform was crisp, every fold aligned. Her boots were polished to a mirror shine, and her bun was so tight it tugged at the corners of her forehead. She had always been meticulous, not because she feared punishment, but because she respected the structure the army gave her. After all she had been through, order felt like safety. She didn't speak much and rarely stood out. Most in the unit knew her as polite, focused, and tough when it counted. She never gave anyone a reason to question her commitment. As the formation stood still, a sharp voice broke the silence. Eyes forward. Commanding officer approaching. Colonel Reese emerged from the headquarters building with 2 senior sergeants trailing behind. His posture was rigid, his uniform flawless. His gaze scanned the formation like a laser, stopping here and there with cold calculation. He was a tall man, mid-50s, with silver streaks at his temples and deep-set eyes that seemed to carry the weight of battlefields long past. Without a word, he began the inspection. One by one, he moved down the lines, barking brief comments, adjusting loose collars, pointing out smudges on rifles. His tone was clipped, his judgment swift. Some soldiers visibly tensed as he passed. Others held their breath. Then he stopped in front of Layla. He said nothing at first, just stared. Layla kept her eyes forward, heart pounding in her chest. She resisted the urge to flinch. Had she missed something? Was her blouse wrinkled? Had a speck of dust escaped her notice? She couldn't tell. Lt. Colonel Reese finally spoke, his voice low but unmistakably firm. Name and rank. Private First Class Layla Torres, sir. He squinted. Where are you from, Private? El Paso, Texas, sir. He nodded slowly, still staring. Step forward. Layla obeyed, taking a small step out of formation. The gravel crunched beneath her boots. Her eyes remained straight ahead. Reese circled her like a hawk. He examined her sleeves, her gear, the position of her belt. Then he tugged gently at the back of her jacket. This doesn't sit properly, he said. Take off your blouse jacket. She hesitated for just a second, confused. Sir? She asked, quietly. You heard me, Private, he replied, louder this time. Remove it. I want to check for compliance underneath. And proper tailoring is unacceptable. Layla's hands moved automatically. Her fingers unfastened the buttons as quietly as they could. Around her, the entire formation stood still, eyes glued forward, but every ear tuned in. This wasn't standard. This wasn't how inspections usually went. Her undershirt was regulation, fitted and clean. There were no violations. But as she pulled off her jacket and turned to hand it to the sergeant standing nearby, something caught everyone's eye. It was a tattoo. Large, detailed, and placed squarely on her upper back, just beneath her shoulder blades. Something that would normally be hidden beneath the uniform. unless removed as it was now. But this wasn't a tattoo of a name, scribbled in cursive, or a symbol of rebellion. This was something different. An American flag, precisely folded into a triangle, inked in rich, deep blue and black. Below it hung a set of military dog tags, the chain curling naturally like a photograph caught mid-fall. Beneath the image were 5 words written in strong, clean letters. S.G.T. Thomas Reese, my brother, my hero, 2006 to 2009. Time froze. Lt. Colonel Reese's face, once stern and unreadable, suddenly changed. The hardness in his eyes cracked just for a second. The sergeants at his sides noticed it. So did a few soldiers close enough to see his expression. He stared at the tattoo as if he were seeing a ghost. The silence was no longer just tense. It was charged with something deeper: confusion, recognition, and the eerie feeling that something far more personal had just erupted in the middle of a formal military ritual. Lila turned slightly, sensing the energy around her shift. Her eyes met the colonel's. He wasn't looking at her anymore like a soldier under review. He was looking at her like someone holding a puzzle piece he had spent years trying to find. In that moment, no one moved. The inspection had stopped. But something much more profound had just begun. Layla Torres could feel the heat crawling up the back of her neck. It wasn't from the morning sun or the layers of uniform she had just peeled off. It was the silence, the thick, heavy, unnatural silence that settled across the formation, like a fog. Every soldier, though trained to keep eyes forward, was fully aware that something was happening, something off script. Something human. Lieutenant Colonel David Reese continued to stare at the tattoo. His lips were parted slightly, but no sound came. His body was still as stone, yet his mind appeared to be racing through time. The name inked into her back had struck him like a bullet. S.G.T. Thomas Reese, his son. A sergeant standing next to him cleared his throat, attempting to bring the inspection back on track. Reese didn't budge. Layla stood motionless, holding her jacket in folded arms across her chest. The silence stretched painfully. She didn't know what she had done wrong, only that she had become the center of attention in a scene where invisibility was often safest. The tattoo, she now realized, had become more than a quiet tribute. It had become a spotlight. Reese finally blinked, and his voice returned, low and sharp. "Private Torres, where did you get that tattoo?" The tone wasn't angry. It wasn't disciplinary. It was something else, personal, raw. Lila turned to face him completely now, her voice steady despite the pressure building inside her. "Sir, it's a memorial," she said. "For someone who saved my life." Reese's jaw tightened. The sergeants behind him exchanged a glance. A few soldiers in formation shifted slightly, unable to help themselves. "And where did you meet?" "Sergeant Thomas Reese?" he asked, not quite hiding the emotional weight pressing down on him. Layla hesitated. She had never spoken about it publicly, not even during her enlistment process. What happened overseas had always felt like something sacred, private, but now the moment demanded more than silence. "Afghanistan, sir, 2009. I was a civilian then. My family was caught in a Taliban raid outside coast. I was 14. He was part of the QRF team that responded." Reese's posture straightened, his face hardening again, but it was clear he was listening closely. "He pulled me out," she continued. "He carried me across a field under fire, gave me water, talked to me the whole time, made me feel like I wasn't just some terrified kid. He got me to safety. Her voice caught just for a second, but she pushed through. "He didn't make it back." The colonel's eyes glossed, just barely. "You knew him well?" "No, sir. Not really. But he changed my life. I never forgot his name. I never will." The silence now felt entirely different. What had started as humiliation being pulled out of line, asked to strip in front of her peers, was now being reshaped into something meaningful. The platoon wasn't just watching anymore. They were feeling it. Still, the chain of command. And the military machine around them had yet to catch up with the emotional weight in the air. One of the sergeants stepped forward, trying to reset the moment. "Sir, perhaps we should continue with the inspection." Reese waved him off without breaking eye contact with Layla. "No, we're not done here." He took a slow step forward. His boots crunched the gravel, loud in the silence. "You tattooed my son's name on your back," he said. "You've carried him with you, even though you barely knew him. That's more than I've done." Layla opened her mouth to respond, but Reese lifted a hand slightly. "You don't have to say anything else," he said. "But I need to." He turned, finally facing the rest of the platoon. The sight of him no longer looked intimidating. He seemed smaller, more human. This inspection was supposed to be about discipline, order, professionalism, he began. But I let my own issues distort that. What just happened here? I made it public. I embarrassed a soldier who did nothing wrong. And worse, I didn't even realize who she was or what she carried. Murmurs buzzed low among the troops, but none dared speak above a whisper. "She honored my son more than I ever could," he said, "and I humiliated her in front of all of you. That was a failure in leadership." Then he turned back to Layla. "Owe you an apology, Private, not just for today, but for every day you carried his name without anyone recognizing the weight of it." Layla's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she replied, "Sir, you don't owe me anything. He gave me my life. I joined because of him, because of what he stood for. This is where I was meant to be." Reese nodded, eyes fixed on her for a long moment. Then, in a rare break of protocol, he stepped back and saluted her. The platoon gasped quietly. A commanding officer saluting a private in the middle of inspection? Unheard of. But no one questioned it. Layla returned the salute slowly, eyes locking with his as they lowered their hands at the same time. For the first time in her military career, she felt truly seen, not as a name on a roster, but as someone whose story mattered. The inspection was called off moments later. The soldiers were dismissed without further explanation, but no one left. Confused, they knew something real had happened, something unforgettable. The woman they barely knew, quiet, focused, always on time, had just revealed a chapter of history few ever got to witness. And the man they feared, the hard-nosed officer with no patience for imperfection, had just revealed a heart cracked wide open. The drill yard was mostly empty now. Soldiers had returned to their barracks in hushed groups, whispering to each other about what they had just witnessed. No one had ever seen Lieutenant Colonel Reese show that kind of emotion, let alone salute. A private during a uniform inspection. Layla Torres, however, stood alone on the edge of the field. The early morning sun had now fully risen, casting gold streaks through the trees and across the gravel. She held her jacket in her hands, unsure what to do next. She hadn't moved since Reese dismissed the formation. Her heart still thumped with adrenaline, not the kind she'd felt in basic training or during night ops drills, but the heavy, chest-clenching kind that comes when something sacred has been pulled out of hiding and placed in the open for all to see. She hadn't meant for the tattoo to be exposed. She wore it for herself, not for show. It was personal, private, etched into her skin as a quiet promise to a man who died saving her. She had never expected his father to be the one standing in front of her, ordering her to remove her uniform. Behind her, she heard boots approaching. She turned slowly. It was LT. Colonel Reese. His posture was more relaxed than earlier, but there was still tension in his face. Not anger. Just the kind of tension that comes from trying to piece together a shattered timeline with new information. I owe you more than an apology, he said, stopping a few paces from her. Layla stood at attention, out of habit. Sir, at ease. Private, he said softly, almost like a different man. She relaxed slightly, letting her arms lower, but didn't speak. She could tell he wasn't done. Reese looked away for a moment, toward the edge of the yard, where the flagpole stood tall against the sky. Then he turned back to her. That tattoo, he began, his voice quieter than before. I wasn't ready to see it. It was like seeing Thomas again for the first time in 15 years. Not in a photo, not in my dreams, but alive through someone else's memory. Layla lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. Reese noticed. You don't need to say anything. I need to understand. Why did you carry his name for so long? You were just a kid when it happened. She nodded slowly, then looked up, her voice calm but full of weight. Because I never forgot what it felt like when he lifted me out of that ditch. I was bleeding. I couldn't hear anything from the blast. Everything was chaos. But he looked me in the eye like I was worth saving, not just another casualty. Reese's lips pressed into a thin line. His eyes were glassy again, but he blinked the emotion away before it broke. I never got the details, he admitted. The army gave me a report. Ambush. Kiar during the rescue mission. I didn't know who he saved. Didn't even know there was a civilian involved. They didn't tell me much either, Layla said. After the attack, they helped my family move. We went into hiding for a while. Eventually, we were granted asylum. I never even got to say thank you. Reese took a deep breath. He always wanted to help people. Even when he was a teenager, he could have taken safer assignments. But he kept volunteering for the tough missions. Said it was the only way to make it count. Layla nodded, lips tight. He did make it count, sir. There was a pause between them. Not awkward, just heavy. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Reese raised an eyebrow. Of course. Why did you join the army after he died? I read your file when I saw his name. You weren't enlisted before 2010. Reese chuckled dryly. You really did your homework. I wanted to know who he was. The tattoo wasn't just for show. It was a connection. He rubbed the back of his neck. After he died, I didn't know how to process it. I worked in logistics, back then civilian contractor. Paperwork, supplies, safe desk. But when Thomas died, something in me broke. I couldn't stand the idea of being on the sidelines anymore. I was too old for combat assignments, but I joined anyway. They put me through OCS, gave me command later. I've been trying to serve in his shadow ever since. Layla looked at him, genuinely moved. He'd be proud of you, sir. He smiled. Faintly. Maybe. I'm just sorry it took me this long to know what he really gave up. They stood quietly for a while, the sun rising higher behind them. Finally, Reese straightened slightly. Listen, I can't promise I won't be tough. That's how I lead. But I'll never forget what you shared with me today. You gave me back something I thought I lost forever. Layla gave a soft nod. You gave me my second chance 15 years ago, through him. Today wasn't humiliation, sir. It was healing. Reese extended his hand. She looked at it for a second, then shook it firmly. He turned to leave, then stopped and looked over his shoulder. One more thing, Torres. You're not invisible anymore. Not to me. Not to anyone. She smiled. For the first time since she enlisted, she truly felt seen not just as a soldier, but as a person, carrying a story too important to stay hidden. And as Reese walked away, she buttoned her blouse again. But the tattoo remained, etched deep into more than just skin now shared, honored, and finally understood. Back in the barracks, whispers still flowed like quiet rivers through every hallway. Soldiers who had been present during the inspection replayed the moment over and over in their heads. The image of Private First Class Lila Torres standing, with her jacket off, her tattoo revealed, and Lieutenant Colonel Reese visibly shaken, had burned itself into their memories. None of them had ever seen him like that, vulnerable, rattled, exposed. The way he had frozen, the words, "That's my son," slipping from his lips, had carried the weight of a war zone and a funeral all in one breath. But for Lila, that moment hadn't ended when the formation was dismissed. She sat alone on her bunk, her folded jacket beside her, still warm from the heat of her own body. The echo of Reese's words replayed in her head, over and over. "You tattooed my son's name on your back. That's more than I've done." She hadn't meant to stir anything. The tattoo was personal, private, a promise to herself. A message to him wherever he was that she hadn't forgotten. But now the entire unit knew. And more importantly, the man who had lived with the grief she could only imagine had seen it and recognized her story. Across the base, in the officers' quarters, Reese sat alone in his small office. His desk was covered in reports, mission briefs, and logs. But his eyes weren't on the paperwork. They were locked on a small, framed photo sitting at the corner of his desk. A photo of SGT Thomas Reese in full combat gear, smiling, standing in front of a Humvee with a few of his brother's dash-in-dash arms. It was taken just weeks before he died. For years, Reese had stared at that photo, to find comfort, to hold on to the face he would never see again in life. But now, for the first time, it didn't feel like a relic. It felt connected to something living, something breathing, someone carrying forward his son's memory, not out of obligation, but from gratitude. He picked up the phone and dialed his wife's number. She answered on the second ring. "David?" Her voice was tired. It always was now. "Yeah, it's me," he said, voice softer than usual. There was a pause. "Is everything okay? I met someone today," he said. "Someone who knew Thomas." Silence. Then carefully, "What do you mean?" "She was there when he died. A girl from Afghanistan. 14 at the time. He saved her." His wife gasped quietly on the other end. "He never told us." "The reports didn't say." "They didn't tell him much either," Reese interrupted. "She thought he died trying to save her. Turns out she was right." Tears welled in his wife's throat. "What's her name?" "Lila Torres. She's a private first class now. Joined the army because of him." Neither of them spoke for a while. Grief shared in silence. Back in the barracks, Layla was finally approached by one of her squad mates, Corporal Jenna Banks, a sharp, no-nonsense soldier who rarely expressed emotion, but respected strength when she saw it. "You good?" Jenna asked, leaning against the doorframe. Layla nodded. "Yeah, I think so. You know, we were all waiting to see him snap. None of us expected him to crack." Layla gave a soft laugh. "Neither did I." Jenna stepped inside and sat across from her. "That tattoo, is it real?" "Yeah," Layla said. "Had it done after basic. I never thought anyone would see it. Not like that. Well, we all did, and it hit us hard." Jenna paused. "You don't talk about it much, do you?" "There's not much to say," Layla replied. "I didn't know him long, but he mattered. More than most people I've known my whole life." Jenna gave a thoughtful nod. "You changed the way people look at Reese, you know." Layla tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "He was a ghost. Just orders and inspections. Nobody really saw him. Today, we saw him. The real him. And I think it scared him as much as it surprised us." Layla didn't say anything right away. She understood that. Sometimes grief becomes armor. And today, that armor cracked wide open. Later that evening, as lights dimmed across the base, a quiet knock tapped against the door of Layla's barracks. She opened it cautiously and found Lieutenant Colonel Reese standing in the hallway, not in uniform but in a plain green t-shirt and fatigue pants. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. She shook her head. "No, sir." "I wanted to give you something," he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small silver object, a military challenge coin. The front bore the insignia of the 22nd Infantry. The back was engraved with a motto, "Valor Beyond Self." "This was Thomas's," Reese said. "It was returned with his effects. I kept it in my drawer for years. I think it's time someone else carries it." Layla looked down at the coin, her throat tightening. "I can't take this, sir." "Yes, you can," he said firmly, but kindly. "He saved your life. You've been carrying his name. Now carry something of his too." She took it gently and nodded, unable to form the right words. Reese turned to leave, then paused. "I'll be holding a small memorial this weekend," he said. 15 years to the day. We've never done it on base before. Just the family. But I'd like you to be there." Layla's eyes met his. "I'd be honored, sir." As he walked away, Layla closed the door and sat on her bunk, staring at the coin in her hand. The metal was cold, but it pulsed with warmth. A name once hidden beneath a uniform had opened hearts, mended silence, and brought 2 lives into the light bound, not by blood, but by sacrifice. The base was quiet the night before the memorial. Wind rustled through the trees outside the barracks, and distant floodlights cast long shadows across the gravel. Inside, Layla Torres sat on her bunk, holding the silver challenge coin in her palm. Her fingers moved across its engraved edge, feeling every ridge like braille from another life. She hadn't spoken much about that day in 2009. It wasn't that she couldn't. It was that few people ever asked, and fewer still would understand. But now, with the memorial approaching and Colonel Reese's invitation weighing in her chest, the memories returned, vivid and unstoppable. It had been hot that day, blistering, the kind of heat that stuck to your skin like wet cloth and refused to let go. Her family had lived in a rural village outside coast, a place the world rarely remembered unless it was on fire. The Taliban had swept through the area like a shadow. Men with rifles, masks, shouting in Pashto, dragging people from homes and setting fires. She had hidden with her younger brother beneath the remnants of a broken wall, clutching his hand so tightly that his fingers turned purple. Her parents were taken. Her uncle was shot in the leg trying to fight back. They'd been trapped, waiting for the inevitable. Then the sound came, rotors in the sky, thumping like thunder. Black hawks, U.S. soldiers fast roping from the sky, rifles raised, shouting. Commands in English, and DAR. The firefight erupted instantly. Explosions, screams, gunshots tearing through the air like needles. She remembered curling over her brother, trying to make herself small, invisible. Then she saw him, SGT, Thomas Reese. He wasn't the first to reach her, but he was the one who stopped. Amid all the chaos, he dropped to his knees beside her. Helmeted and sweating, dirt smeared across his face. He asked her name in broken Dari, then switched to English when she nodded. She could understand him better than she could speak. He smiled at her genuinely and told her she was safe now. He pulled a canteen from his side, uncapped it, and offered her a drink. His hands were steady, even though bullets cracked overhead. Her brother had been shaking, blood on his cheek. From a cut. Thomas saw it, dug into his pouch, and handed her a bandage with quick instructions. Then, without hesitation, he lifted both of them, one arm each, and carried them across the open field toward the extraction point. Gunfire followed. Mortar exploded in the distance. Her ears rang with the sound of war, but she remembered Thomas, speaking to her the entire time. "You're okay. We're gonna make it. Keep breathing. You're brave." I've got you." Each sentence came like a lifeline. She never saw the explosion, just a flash. A heat wave. The next moment, she was flying. Through the air. Dust filled her mouth. Her shoulders slammed into the ground. The world spun. When her vision cleared, she saw him. Thomas had shielded them with his own body. He was lying face down, motionless. Other soldiers reached her, lifted her and her brother, pulled them into the helicopter. She screamed for the man who had saved her, for the soldier who had made her feel like she mattered. They told her later that he had died instantly. Shrapnel had torn through his armor. No one could have saved him, but she never forgot the way he looked at her, like she was someone worth rescuing. And that changed everything. Back in the barracks, she blinked the tears away and reached for the small envelope she had kept tucked inside her footlocker. Inside was the first letter she ever wrote in English, at age 15. A year after arriving in the U.S., it was addressed to the family of S.G.T. Thomas Reese, but she had never mailed it. Too scared. Too unsure. Now, she opened it and read. The faded words aloud, just above a whisper. "I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if it's okay for me to write. But I want you to know that your son saved my life. He saved me when I had no hope left. He looked at me like I was more than just another frightened girl. He made me feel human. I will never forget him. I will carry his name with honor. I promise to become someone he would be proud of. Thank you. Thank you for giving the world a man like that." She folded the letter again, this time slowly, carefully, and set it beside the coin. A soft knock interrupted the quiet. Jenna peeked her head in. "You ready?" Layla looked up. "For what?" Jenna smirked. "The Colonel's looking for you. Wants to walk the memorial site with you before everyone else arrives tomorrow." Layla stood, sliding the letter into her pocket. "Yeah, I'm ready." Minutes later, she found herself walking alongside Lt. Colonel Reese across a small open field behind the base chapel. It was simple, just a table with framed photos of Thomas, a folded flag, a small stack of candles. A few folding chairs had been set up for those attending. Reese stood beside her, silent for a while. "He loved that photo," he finally said, pointing to one of Thomas in fatigues, holding a soccer ball with Afghan children laughing around. "Him," said it was his favorite mission, humanitarian run. Layla smiled. "He was kind," Reese nodded. "He didn't have to be. But he was, even when no one was looking." They stood there, two people connected by tragedy and survival. By silence and unspoken respect, Reese turned to her. "You'll speak tomorrow?" Layla hesitated. "I haven't before." He gave her a kind look. "Maybe it's time." She nodded slowly. The girl who once hid under rubble was gone. In her place stood a soldier, a woman forged in fire, carrying a name inked in skin and soul. The morning of the memorial arrived quietly. There were no sirens, no loudspeakers, no formation calls. Just stillness and reverence. The air was crisp for July, as if nature itself understood the gravity of the day. A few low clouds drifted overhead, casting soft shadows across the chapel lawn, where the setup from the night before now stood complete. The folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, each seat bearing a small American flag tucked under the leg. The photographs of S.G.T. Thomas Reese had been joined by a framed letter, the one Layla had written at 15. Reese had asked her permission to place it there, calling it the truest tribute my son ever received. Layla stood just outside the chapel, hands clasped behind her back, the folded letter in her pocket, now replaced by Reese's challenge coin. She wore her formal uniform, no gear, no weapon, only her neatly pressed blouse and polished boots. Her hair was tied even tighter than usual, and her expression was calm. But inside, waves of emotion crashed against her composure. She hadn't spoken in front of a crowd since boot camp introductions. This was different. This wasn't about her anymore. The first to arrive were a few officers from Reese's inner circle. Then came a handful of older veterans, friends of the family. A tall man with a Marine Corps pin and a limp. A woman with silver hair and tired eyes, clutching a folded photo album. And finally, Reese's wife, Eleanor, small, quiet, and trembling slightly as she walked beside her husband. Layla had never seen a woman look both broken and proud at the same time. As the chairs filled, Layla remained at the edge of the gathering, unsure if it was truly her place. Reese noticed and stepped away from the front row, walking toward her slowly. Still thinking of backing out? He asked gently. "No, sir. I just ... I'm not used to being seen." He nodded. "You weren't invisible that day in Coast. You're not invisible now. You're part of this story, too." She nodded, eyes drifting toward the flag-draped table. "I'm not sure I deserve to be." Reese took a breath. "You're the only one who does." A military chaplain stepped up to the podium and tapped the mic gently. The hum of sound drew the small crowd's attention. "We gathered today to remember Sergeant Thomas Reese, 15 years after his final mission," the chaplain began. "We remember not only the sacrifice he made, but the lives he touched, some in ways even he never knew." A short prayer followed, then a moment of silence. Reese stepped forward next, hands clasped, voice steady. "My son wasn't perfect." He began. He was stubborn, impulsive. He left the toilet seat up and never returned a borrowed tool. But he believed in doing good, even when no one noticed, even when the mission didn't make headlines. He believed one act of courage could change a life. He paused, looked toward Layla, and he was right. Layla felt every eye shift toward her. Her pulse quickened. She hadn't prepared a speech. She hadn't written anything down. All she had were the memories, sealed into her like ink. Reese gave her a nod. She stepped forward slowly, her boots soft on the grass. Standing at the podium, she looked out at the crowd. Some strangers, some fellow soldiers, some family. All of them gathered because of one man. She exhaled and began. "My name is Private First Class Layla Torres," she said, voice even but low. 15 years ago, I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't even a citizen. I was just a girl in a country, at war, hiding from the world behind a crumbling wall with my little brother." She swallowed, eyes lifting to meet the audience. "Then your son found me." She let the silence hold for a moment. He didn't have to stop. There were others, shouting, shooting, dying. But he saw me, really saw me. And in that moment, he didn't treat me like a casualty. He treated me like a person. He carried me when I couldn't walk, gave me water when I couldn't speak. And when the world exploded again, he shielded me with his own body. Layla's voice began to shake, but she didn't stop. I lived, because he chose to give his life for mine. And I've carried that with me every day since. It's why I joined the army, not out of revenge, not out of anger, but out of hope. Hope that I could become someone worthy of that gift. She stepped back, nodded once, and returned to her seat. The silence that followed was thick with emotion. Reese's wife reached over and took Layla's hand, squeezing it tightly. No words passed between them. None were needed. The ceremony closed with a rifle salute and the playing of taps. As the haunting notes drifted into the sky, Layla closed her eyes and pictured that moment in the helicopter, the first and last time she'd seen Thomas's face in full light. The image had never left her. But today, something else joined it. Piece. Later, as chairs were folded and photos packed away, Reese approached her again. "You did more than speak," he said. "You gave him a voice." Layla looked up. "Thank you for letting me be part of this." Reese shook his head. You always were. They stood side by side, watching as the final flag was lowered for the day. The sky above them clear now, and the silence no longer heavy settled like a soft blanket. Not grief, not sorrow, not just remembrance. The following morning felt different, as if the base itself had shifted. The rhythms of military life carried on. Morning PT, mess hall lines, tactical briefings, but something unspoken hummed beneath the surface. Word of the memorial had spread, even among those who hadn't attended. The soldiers who had seen Lieutenant Colonel Reese's salute to a private during inspection now knew why. Respect began to follow Layla Torres in a way she hadn't experienced before. It wasn't loud or performative. No one treated her like a hero, and she didn't expect them to. But her presence now carried a subtle gravity, as if her story, once hidden beneath fabric and silence, had become part of the unit's DNA. Nods lingered a little longer. Jokes paused when she entered the room. Even the hard-edged sergeants treated her with a quiet regard that hadn't been there just days earlier. Still, Layla remained grounded. She kept her schedule tight, her discipline sharp. She showed up early to PT. She helped the new recruits organize their gear. She still ate her meals at the far end of the mess hall, though now she was never truly alone. It was 3 days after the memorial, when the company was ordered to assemble for a rare midweek address. Rumors swirled quickly. Surprise inspection? Promotion announcements? Guest speaker? By mid-afternoon, the entire company had gathered on the field. Layla stood in the middle row, boots planted, hands behind her back, face stoic under the sun. She hadn't been told anything in advance, but something in the air felt familiar, like the moment before a storm. But without fear, Lieutenant Colonel Reese stood at the front, flanked by 2 senior officers. But today, his stance was different. His hands weren't folded behind his back in command. Instead, they rested calmly at his sides. His voice, when he spoke, carried no edge. Soldiers, he began, scanning the crowd. What we do here, what we wear, how we carry ourselves. All of it matters. Discipline and structure are not optional. They are the foundation of every mission and every victory. He paused, but structure without humanity is just a wall. And sometimes that wall hides the very people we should be honoring. Murmurs rippled through the ranks. Reese continued. Last week, during an inspection, I did something that goes against everything I've tried to teach. I singled out a soldier. I questioned her presentation, her bearing, and under the pretense of regulation, I humiliated her in front of you all. Layla felt a sharp warmth bloom in her chest. He didn't say her name, but every soldier knew exactly who he meant. What? I didn't realize what I failed to see was that Private Torres wasn't just another name in the line. She was carrying a legacy, not just a tattoo, not just a story, but the memory of a man I knew better than anyone. He drew a breath. It was heavy, but full of resolve. Private Torres is alive because of my son, Sergeant Thomas Reese, who gave his life during an operation in Khost, Afghanistan. In 2009, she was a civilian then. A child, he shielded her with his own body. And for 15 years, she carried that memory, in silence, with dignity, with purpose. You could hear a pin drop on the field. I owe her more than an apology, he said. I owe her acknowledgement, and so do all of us. He turned to face Layla, Private Torres, front and center. She hesitated just a second, then stepped forward. The rows of soldiers parted as she passed. She walked with composure, her spine straight, every step steady. When she reached him, she stopped and saluted. Reese returned the salute. Then, slowly, he removed a small box from his pocket. Inside was a distinguished service coin, reserved for acts of integrity, commitment, and leadership beyond rank. It wasn't standard for someone of her grade, but Reese didn't flinch. In recognition of your honor, your perseverance, and the legacy you carry, I present this coin not as a commander, but as a father and a soldier. He handed it to her. The crowd remained still, quiet, reverent. Layla accepted it without a word. Her voice might have failed her if she'd tried. Then Reese turned back to the formation. "Let this be a reminder to all of us," he said, "that everyone wearing this uniform has a story. And sometimes the bravest ones are the quietest." He stepped back. The soldiers didn't cheer. No one clapped. But something stronger filled the space. Respect, undiluted and real. Layla returned to her spot in formation, heart pounding. She could feel eyes on her, but not in the way she had feared that day on the inspection line. This time, it wasn't scrutiny, it was acknowledgement. After the address, Reese approached her privately. "I don't expect you to forgive how I handled that inspection," he said, "but I hope today helped." Layla looked at him and smiled. Faintly, "I already forgave you, sir." That day changed more than just how people saw me. It changed how I see myself. He nodded, silent for a moment. "You carry his memory with more strength than I ever did." "You gave him that strength," she replied. "He just passed it on." They stood there a moment longer, not as officer and subordinate, but as two people forever connected by one man's sacrifice. And for the first time, Reese didn't see a reminder of loss when he looked at her. He saw a continuation of love. The summer sun sank behind the base's western fence line, washing the barracks in gold. It had been 2 weeks since the ceremony, and something had shifted in Private First Class Layla Torres. Not in how she stood, or how she saluted those. Things had always been solid, but in how she breathed, how she walked, how she met the eyes of the people around her. For the first time since stepping into uniform, she wasn't just carrying a burden. She was carrying a purpose. The mornings came easier now. She'd found her rhythm again up at dawn, the rhythmic slap of boots on pavement during PT, mess hall breakfast, drills. The familiarity didn't numb her anymore. It centered her. She had a place, a role, and more importantly, a name that was no longer tethered to silence. She stood out now, not because of the tattoo or the inspection incident, but because of how she led quietly. She volunteered to run evening drills for the new recruits. She reviewed procedures for those struggling in the classroom. When one of the younger privates froze during a live fire exercise, Layla knelt beside her, whispered steady words, and stayed until she fired her first shot. Calm, focused, present. It wasn't just Reese who noticed anymore. Word had reached. Command. And so, one afternoon, while Layla was cleaning her rifle in the weapons bay, a corporal appeared at her side with a sealed envelope. "Orders from upstairs," the corporal said. "Command wants to see you." Layla wiped her hands clean, opened the envelope, and read the letter once. Her eyes didn't widen. Her jaw didn't drop. She simply folded it, placed it inside her front pocket, and stood. The following morning, she boarded a military transport heading east. Washington, D.C., she'd never been. The flight was short, but the weight of what it represented filled every minute. When she arrived at the Pentagon Annex, she was escorted to a private meeting room. Inside sat 3 individuals, 2 officers and a civilian representative from the Department of Defense's Community Engagement and Historical Recognition Division. That the meeting was short and without ceremony. They spoke with kindness and transparency. They had reviewed her record, learned of her story through Reese's report and the memorial footage. And now, they wanted her help. They were creating a permanent exhibit at the National Museum of the U.S. Army, an exhibit honoring service members who weren't born American citizens but chose to wear the uniform, fight for the country, and redefine what it means to serve. They wanted Layla's story to be a part of it, not just a name. A feature, photographs, her uniform blouse with the tattoo replica preserved. A video interview. She hesitated at first, unsure whether she was ready to be seen by the world in such a personal way. But then she thought of the girls who might walk through that museum one day, immigrants, refugees, daughters of war searching for something that looked like possibility. And she said yes. Months passed. Back on base, Layla's life resumed. But the ripples of her story didn't stop. A journalist from Stars and Stripes requested an interview. A veterans podcast asked her to speak. And one day, she received a handwritten letter from Eleanor Reese. You gave me something I didn't think I'd ever have again, peace. Thomas lives through you, and that brings me comfort I never imagined possible. Thank you for not hiding him, and thank you for becoming who you are. Layla framed it and placed it beside her bunk. Then came something she hadn't expected at all. She was offered a slot in the specialized cultural liaison program, a highly selective path for soldiers, with multilingual backgrounds and intercultural experience. It meant additional training, longer deployments, but it also meant impact, change, preventing the kind of tragedies she had survived. She accepted without hesitation. One evening, just before her departure to Fort Huachuca for language immersion and intelligence coursework, her unit hosted a quiet farewell dinner. No speeches, no decorations, just tables filled with food, laughter, and soldiers who had become more than comrades. Before dessert, Reese stood and raised a glass. To Private Torres, he said simply, for proving that courage isn't just found in combat, but in how we carry our scars. The room lifted their glasses, and Layla, cheeks warm, lifted hers too. Later that night, as she packed the last of her gear into her duffel, she paused. On the inside flap of her locker door was a small mirror. For years, she had avoided looking at herself, too long never sure what stared back. But tonight, she leaned in, studied her eyes, her jaw, her shoulders. Not just a soldier, not just a survivor, a woman who had found her place. Her hand moved to her back, fingers brushing the fabric of her shirt over the tattoo, the shield, the dog tag, and the number, 37,204. For so long, that number had spoken louder than her voice. But not anymore. She reached for a pen and pulled a slip of paper from her bag. On it, she wrote the words. They saw the tattoo first, but now they see me. She folded the note, tucked it inside her journal, and zipped her bag. Layla Torres walked out of the barracks into the night air, stars scattered overhead. Her boots struck the gravel with quiet certainty. She didn't look back, because for the first time since she'd been saved, she wasn't running toward the past. She was walking boldly into her own future, her own name, her own voice, and a story that now belonged to her as much as it did to the man who had given her a second chance. The end.